streaming YouTube channel. Authority members, licensees, and the public are able to attend the meeting remotely by clicking the meeting link listed on the agenda or by calling 888-788-0099. Thank you for your participation in tonight's remote meeting, where the format is focused on efforts to comply with COVID-19 pandemic health and safety guidelines while ensuring review and approval of business items. Authority members, along with staff, remain committed to conducting city business, engaging with our applicants, and supporting our community in the best way possible. On behalf of the local licensing authority and Broomfield staff, we appreciate your patience as we all move through this unprecedented event together. We're grateful to all residents for doing their part to help flatten the curve and keep Broomfield healthy and safe. The local licensing authority meeting is called to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Berlin.
Present.
Groom. Jaworski.
Here.
Marsh Holston.
Here.
Murray.
Here.
Starkovich. Oh,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
my apologies. Starkovich.
Thank you. We do have a quorum. We'll move to agenda item 2, disposition of minutes. Each member of the authority has a copy of the minutes of the January 6, 2021 License and Authority meeting. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? Seeing none, the minutes of the meeting of the Licensing Authority of January 6, 2021 stand approved as submitted by the Deputy City Clerk. We'll move to agenda item 3A. CF Altitude LLC doing business as Alta number 6140. Transfer of ownership, fermented malt beverage license. Members of the authority have a copy of the application along with the agenda memorandum, which sets forth the staff's review. Are representatives present?
Hello, Kevin Coates here. Sorry about that. It rejoined me, so I'm just adjusting here my computer screen to get everybody here in their face, and I apologize. But here I'm here on behalf of CF Altitude LLC. We should have Dennis Dursky as well, although he may be suffering through the same problem. We could see all your faces for the last 10 minutes or so, but then it rejoins everyone. And we went off there for a second. So I see Mr. Dursky coming on now.
Mr. Coates, welcome. Mr. Dursky, welcome. I see Mr. Dursky's face now. Mr. Coates, there you are.
I'm here. You know, every program's different as they come in from city to city. It's just a moment of having to get it all adjusted. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Mr. Coates, would you please state your name, and Mr. Dursky, if you would state your name and your business addresses for the record. Mr. Coates, go ahead.
So my name's Kevin Coates. I'm from Dillon. My registration number is 25995, and my address is 455 Sherman Street, Suite 300, Denver, Colorado 80203.
My name is Dennis Kirksey, and I'm the Vice President of Regional Operations for CF Altitude, and my address is 1239 West Lone Cowboy Drive in Pueblo, West, Colorado 81007.
Was the city clerk able to hear him? I had a hard time.
I could not hear him.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Oh, that's a lot better. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Dursky, if you
Stick
do
my
it
hand
again,
on the
please.
computer, I think. My name is Dennis Kirksey, and I'm the Vice President of Regional Operations for CF Altitude. And my address is 1239 West Lone Cowboy Drive in Pueblo, West, Colorado 81007.
Thank you. And once again, welcome. We heard that. Does the authority have any questions of the representatives?
I do, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Murray.
Mr. Coates, thanks for coming again tonight. We appreciate that. Mr. Dursky, did you come all the way up from Pueblo?
I'm actually in Grand Junction right now.
Wow. Well, thank you very much for at least telecommuting all the way. I saw earlier today that I-70 was shut down, so you might have had to telecommute from a parking lot if there someplace. Just want to verify the address. Is this the store located on 128th and Lowell Boulevard?
Yes. Yes.
Is it the 7-Eleven that's on that corner there?
No. We're actually 127. So we're the
127.
Conoco right down the street, a block down.
You're just west of Northside Tavern then.
I'm not sure where the Northside Tavern. Oh, okay. No, I know exactly where it is. Yes. We're right out on the front there.
Okay, perfect. It seemed to me that if memory serves that we had some sort of hearing or transfer or something within the last 5 or 6 months. Was that your store? Can you refresh my memory if that was you guys? I don't know if that was a violation or transfer or a renewal.
There was a violation at that site at that time.
Okay.
Around that time, but I was in front of the authority when we did the transfer. It would have been about 2 years ago, back when we could do things in person.
No, I must be thinking of the violation. This is for the city clerk then, or of the city attorney. If in fact there was a violation within the last year, and there's a probated sentence, do we know if they're still under probation? Will that affect this transfer or not?
That violation was completed, and we did the Pester Marketing did the renewal, and we did the renewal with the violation, but everything regarding the violation has been fulfilled and met.
Okay, great, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other members have any questions?
Is it helpful at all if I explain the transaction itself, just so that Mr. Dursky can answer any questions associated with day-to-day operations? But would it be helpful at all if I discussed how we're here?
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Coates.
Thank you. So CF Altitude LLC purchased assets, those assets being convenience stores here in the state of Colorado and 3 other states for Pester Marketing. The closing of the transaction occurred on January 15th. Those assets included in Colorado about 92 convenience stores, 75 of which have fermented malt beverage licenses off premise. One of them here in Broomfield. And with respect to that transaction itself, essentially CF Altitude LLC is owned by 2 entities up through another series of entities that essentially get you to 50% ownership by by Phillips 66, publicly traded company, and by Fortress Investment, a huge company as well. The 2 individuals are designated representatives from those 2 companies or who are on the master file letter. That would be Randall Fralix from the Phillips 66 side and Greg Shoemaker from the Fortress side. But there's nothing in their background that make them ineligible to have ownership or control in a liquor licensed establishment. Mr. Dursky did work for Pester Marketing. Now he is working for CF Altitude LLC as the Vice President of Regional Retail Operations, excuse me. But from the standpoint of the transaction itself, essentially we've been going through the process. We had 75 temporary permits issued, and we are going through the process, obviously, of completing these applications through the state process. But they do have a master file, and there's nothing in the background of the individuals on the letter that would make them ineligible for ownership or control purposes for the transfer. Company of good moral character, no issues associated with that. So as I said, I thought it'd be helpful to give you a little background of how we're here. Nothing on the day-to-day basis or on the ground level is changing. The store manager, I believe, is the same. As I said, Mr. Dursky is VP, was with the old company. Now he's with the new company, as well as I believe the area manager is the same as well. So certainly any additional questions you might have associated with the ownership change, I'm happy to answer and turn it back over to you for any additional questions you might have with respect to operations to Mr. Dursky.
Thank you. Does any member of the authority have any questions for Mr. Coates or Mr. Dursky?
Yes,
I
Chairman.
have- Yes, sir, Mr. Jezierski.
Thank you. And I do appreciate that background. I think that did answer most of the questions that I had. And specifically, I would just like Mr. Dursky just to verify that the employees and the management of this convenience store are going to remain the same.
Yes, they've all came over.
Okay, so nothing's changing. I think that's what your
Yeah.
representation believed, and just want to make sure that was correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Other than the
Yeah,
ownership,
nothing else. Go ahead.
other than the ownership, I was saying, but yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
right. Yeah, I get that. I just wanted to make sure because I was definitely I really appreciate the background that you gave us, and my questions related to first of all who Mr. Dursky was, and I'm glad you clarified that. And then I had questions as to whether or not there's going to be any change on the ground, and it sounds like that's going to remain the same. So nothing further.
Thank you. Mr. Marsh Holshin, any questions?
Not this time, thank you.
I do have a question for the city attorney. At one time, did we not talk about the municipality, Broomfield, doing their own background checks on these large transfers and corporations? It's not necessary for this one, obviously, but was that not our discussion? I believe Mr. Murray had once brought it up.
We did discuss that. This does, and Mr. Coase can chime in as he wishes. This involves the state master file, so that's where the bulk of the background checks live. So I think I don't know that we did, and Samantha, you can correct me, an additional background check on this one. No, I actually did. I went back on minutes and found where that had been discussed. And from what I got from it was just that the authority wanted a copy of the confirmation of the master file. Not that we needed to do our own background check or anything of that nature. If you would like in the future, I can definitely send for a local background check with those, but in order to do that, I have to have names, social security numbers, and birth dates for that to happen. And with a master file, I don't have access to all of that.
And if I may, there's some restrictions associated with a master file and local authority in terms of what the local authority can ask for once a master file exists. So that's obviously not for me to discuss here with you. That's more for Ms. Gilbert. But those restrictions I think entail that the applicant doesn't have to provide additional information once they're at the master file level, other than the individual history records. If they're asked for, we certainly can provide those if asked for pursuant from the master file letter. And then the local authority can conduct their own investigation, I suppose, with respect to that. But really the fingerprinting and all that's already done. And that's the point of the master file letter.
Ms. Gilbert, your opinion?
Well, at this point in time, we don't have additional requirements beyond what the applicant has submitted.
Okay, I know that we had talked about it. Mr. Murray brought it up probably a year ago, maybe even a bit longer than that. I couldn't recall what the resolution was, but I guess I understand with the master file, we could see some of the documentation there, but it would not be either necessary or even possibly not even permissible for us to ask for our own.
The additional is what is restricted, but what has been submitted to state, you can always ask for that.
Okay, Mr. Murray, what was it that you were seeking when you first requested that? And if the city clerk would provide some of that documentation, would that satisfy your needs?
You know, Mr. Chair, I actually don't recall that specific conversation. I do know that in the past, a couple times I brought up the timing of background checks versus 6 or 7 or 8 months later, we get the applicant in front of us, and I was asking for fresher backgrounds. the specific topic you brought up tonight, I need to mea culpa. I don't recall that one, sir.
Okay, we'll just move on and possibly the city clerk can bring us up to speed on what our discussion was. And maybe at a future meeting, we can talk about if we have additional needs or desires to see that.
Let me say there's one thing I might be able to help you with there too, based upon Mr. Murray's comment. The freshness of essentially the background check. I was talking with Robert Darrow yesterday at Liquor Enforcement Division, and he indicated that there is a process that state utilizes that if there is a criminal act, I suppose, or someone who is in the database on a master file letter, that they will give notification to the local jurisdictions about that. So that is a refresher or an update essentially for any background check that's been done, maybe even as much as 5 years ago, associated with any master file or the individuals listed on a master file. But my understanding is if there's a criminal activity that state will and you can verify this information again. I'm just going over a conversation I had with Mr. Darrow that information will be provided to the local jurisdiction.
Mr. Coates, when you mentioned that any criminal violation in, say, the last 5 years, would that also include traffic violations involving alcohol?
No, but traffic violations, and the reality of it is traffic violations are not considered to be part of moral character or part of the analysis associated with compliance under liquor code. So that's state liquor's position. It's pretty consistent with what the code says as well. So there used to be obviously a provision under the old forms that asked for driver's license information and whether or not it was suspended. That's not even on the forms anymore. So with respect to traffic, that's something that has not, as long as it's not, doesn't rise to the level of being a misdemeanor, is not something that generally state is ever going to consider to be relevant. And state kind of holds the rule with respect to master files.
I know in the past we've asked when an applicant has come before us who has had a DUI, DWAI, about their experiences and what they may have learned, and prevention, oftentimes, in my opinion, probably makes them a better server because they know the jeopardy that they had faced.
Oh, absolutely. And a DUI is a misdemeanor. That's not a traffic offense. So that's always relevant. And the forms do still cover, obviously it says, I think, including any DUI or DWAI are on the forms. But I was taking your reference to traffic to be infractions, including things such as careless driving, reckless driving, those kind of things. But DUI is absolutely in the mix and with respect to any liquor matter.
Okay, other than the master files, and if it's been a local application and we've seen that, that's always something that we did question. So possibly our past discussion about wanting to see something local, that may have been what precipitated that discussion, but we'll move on. We're not going to solve this tonight, but possibly we can discuss it with the clerk and with Ms. Gilbert, and we'll see what we might be able to get from that.
Thank you.
Any additional questions?
No, sir.
What's the pleasure of the authority then?
Let me get there. I'm sorry. I'm at the bottom of the page. That the licensing authority approve a transfer of ownership of the fermented malt beverage license from Pester Marketing Company DBA Alta number 6140 to CF Altitude LLC DBA Alta number 6140.
Is there a second, please?
I'll second.
There is a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Nope.
Seeing none, would the clerk please call roll?
Berlin,
Aye.
Jezierski,
Yes.
Marsh Holshin,
Yes.
Murray.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion passes. Mr. Coates, it's good seeing you again. Mr. Dursky, thanks for being with us.
Can't wait to see you guys in person again. You know, we're all got this fatigue associated with this, but I always like going out to Broomfield. So I can't wait to see you folks in person.
Thanks.
Thank you for tonight.
Getting closer.
We're getting closer. We're getting closer. You guys have a great night. Thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Good
Mr.
night.
Dursky.
Good night.
We'll move to agenda item 3B. Forgotten Inc. LLC, doing business as Inks and Drinks, application for a new tavern license, boundary setting. Members of the authority have a copy of the application along with the agenda memorandum which sets forth the staff's review. Would the staff please summarize the materials?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All that's necessary at this point is to note receipt of the application, establish the neighborhood boundaries, and set the date and time for the hearing. The suggested neighborhood boundary is the area within a radius of 1 mile from the premises proposed for the license.
Thank you. Before we move to the applicant, I have a question about the application number 14. Has a liquor or beer license ever been issued to the applicant? And if yes, identify the name of the business and any current financial interest. If there's an attachment or an answer to that, I didn't see it.
I will check on that. This particular establishment had a license under the same name. She closed in March of last year and then is now reopening. It's still at the Flatiron Mall where it was before. It's just in another building or part of the building there. So it's the same company. Everything's the same. It's just they're going for a license in a different place because they had surrendered their previous license.
Okay, I'll let you and Ms. Gilbert decide whether we need that to have an addendum for the next hearing, but we'll go from there. Are the applicants or the applicant's representatives present?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can. Would you
Okay.
please state your name and your business address?
Nisa Cromer, and the business is at 1 West Flatiron Crossing Drive, number 408, Broomfield 80021.
Thank you and welcome. Do you have any objections to the proposed neighborhood boundary?
No,
Then what's the pleasure of the licensing authority?
I had just one quick question, not relevant to tonight's issue, but Nasa, what building are you next door to? What restaurant?
I'm now next to Gordon Biersch.
Okay, and you were
I was
the
next to
same
the Village.
location before? The Village Tavern, correct?
That was the old location, yes.
Okay, yeah, that's where I thought it was, and I thought I remembered you were in there just not too long ago. Okay.
Yep,
Well, hopefully the new place is more successful than the other location.
it's huge, so I hope so.
Very good. That's all I have, Mr. Chair, and then let me get back to my notes. That the local licensing authority note receipt of the application for a new tavern license at 1 West Flatiron Crossing Drive, number 0408, Broomfield, Colorado 80021. That the local licensing authority set a public hearing on said application for 5:30 p.m. on April 7, 2021, to be held in the City Council chambers of the George Day Ciro City and County Building or remotely as necessary. And that the local licensing authority establish the neighborhood boundaries for the subject application as the area within a radius of 1 mile from the applicant's proposed location as attached.
Thank you. Is there a second, please?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. What's the pleasure of the licensing authority? Would the clerk please, I'm sorry. Is there any discussion on the motion? Would the clerk please call roll?
Jaworski,
Yes.
Marsh Holshan,
Yes.
Murray,
Yes.
Berlin.
Yes. Thank you. That motion passes. Ms. Cromer, we will see you most likely remotely next month.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Thank you
good
very
night.
much.
You too.
We'll now move to agenda item 3C. Wines for Humanity LLC, doing business as Wines for Humanity, request for tasting permit. Members of the authority have a copy of the application along with the agenda memorandum, which sets forth the staff's review. Are representatives present?
Here we go. Anton Steinhardt, I'm here.
Hello and welcome. Would
Thank you.
please state your name for the record and your business address?
Anton Steinhardt, Wines for Humanity, 7247 West 116 Avenue, number 4.
Broomfield, correct?
Yep, sorry.
Thank you. Does the authority have any questions of Mr. Steinhardt?
Nope.
Mr. Jazierski, I can't see your picture. Any questions from you?
Oh, I don't know. I was debating it. Sure. Mr. Steinhardt, is it?
Yep.
Just a question. Are you familiar? Have you done something like this before in the past? Are you familiar with serving alcohol?
At that location, sir?
Just in general.
In general? Yeah. I took the test myself. I was licensed, I'm still licensed in Indiana, and I had to take the test there.
Okay. So yeah, maybe if you could give a brief background of maybe yourself, your company, and what you're doing. I think that'd be helpful. You could give like a elevator pitch you could give us.
Yeah, absolutely. What we do is we do in-home wine tastings for charity. Our goal is the prevention of homelessness for families with children. However, we also do support any kind of organization. Case in point, Broomfield Fish or Family Promise, and many other ones right there in Denver and, surrounding areas there. So I don't know, did that answer your question?
Very briefly, I guess. What's your, you mentioned Indiana. What's your experience in Indiana?
Indiana, I had to get a license to do wine tastings in Indiana. However, I do not have a permanent location in Indiana. That was, a couple of years ago. But
Okay.
I do have, I got 9 locations. I got, I want to say, most likely 4 or 5 licenses under Wines for Humanity in different states. So I'm not unaccustomed to pouring wine under the guidelines of the local states.
Okay, so that's very helpful. So you've been doing this in other states for the same company, it sounds like.
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, for about 10 years, 12 actually.
12 years? Okay. Have you had any violations during that time period with any of these locations?
None of them.
Awesome. Great. Well, that's what helpful. I was just trying to get a little more information on yourself and your background. It's good to know that you've been doing this in other areas, that you've been successful, and I think I'd be happy to have you here in Broomfield as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions?
I have a few, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Murray?
Mr. Steinhardt, thanks for being with us tonight. I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
In looking over your your control plan, you indicate down in the next to the last paragraph, an ID check will be done on both vertical and horizontal driver's licenses, and nobody will be served that is under 21 years old. we spend a lot of time with a lot of our applicants going over the legality and the specificity of a vertical license. And I just want to make sure that you are aware of the differences. A vertical license normally indicates a person is under the age of 21, but there's a 20-day grace period. So if someone shows you a 20-day license, or a vertical license, there may be some math involved in making sure that they're not within that 20-day grace period. A lot of the folks that we deal with just take the internal stance that if it's vertical, they're going to choose not to serve, period. But because you brought up the vertical, I wanted to make sure that you were aware of there's a couple different ways of handling that. So that's information for you. And then I just wanted to check and see the benefits that you provide to outside entities like Broomfield Fish. Are those monies that go out after every tasting or once a year? Are they reported to the state? Or are you audited by the IRS? How are those monies tracked going out? Because you're indicating to us that you do benefit other entities, but what do you do to assure us that money is actually for the benefit as opposed to just going in your coffers, for lack of better terms, I guess? Because you
Okay.
represent at your benefit.
Yep. Well, that would be actually easy to check because Broomfield Fish, I'm sure, would vouch for that real quick. But besides that, I could give you a list every quarter. That's about 300 different charities that we donate money to in those 9 states. And I could give you copies of checks and whatever. So that is easily accessible. I could, gladly email you the latest one from the 4th quarter. We do, to answer one of the questions, we do send it once a quarter. Because, if you did it weekly, you would send Bloomfield a check every week. That would be kind of stupid.
Well, checking your records is not necessary. I just wanted to make sure that with the presentation that you made to us, that you are of benefit to outside entities. If in fact it became necessary in the future, I just want to make sure that you had the ability to answer any potential questions. A lot of people can say, I benefit the world, but in fact, that's not happening. I just want to make sure that your representation is factual and you can back it up if necessary in the future.
Absolutely. Appreciate the checking on this. Yeah, I'm sure stuff like you mentioned has happened, but we are not one of them.
Perfect. Great. Yeah. And then in looking at your action plan for when you want to do it, I see that your first potential tasting is coming up on the 20th of this month. Have you got all your employees lined up for that, your servers and your deliverers? Everybody is taking the TIPS test and meets the qualifications for the city of Broomfield. Is that correct?
Yeah, we got one lady, well, 2 ladies. One of them has it already. The other one is taking it tomorrow.
Perfect.
And Samantha is fully aware of it. And if I may throw her name in, I mean it's bottom of my heart. She has been amazingly helpful to guide me through this process. So, yeah, these 2 people will be licensed. One of them is already.
Good.
Yeah.
Sound like you got all your ducks in a row. Thank you very much for that. And that's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Any other member of the authority have any questions?
I do have a question, yes.
Mr. Marshall.
So my understanding is that you're going to be doing wine tasting in people's private residences?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Colorado law allows for minors to consume alcohol in a private residence with the consent of the private property owner and if they're in the presence of that person's parents. What is your plan in a situation where if somebody wants to do that?
Well, I wasn't even aware of that because nowhere else do we pour for anybody under 21, parents or no parents agreement on that. We don't pour under 21.
So your intention is to not even if like they insisted on it, you're not going to serve them?
No.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Could I ask one question too, Mr. Chair?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, in the guidelines, it says we cannot pour more than 4 different wines with a maximum of an ounce. The typical tasting cup is way below an ounce, not even half an ounce. So my question is, would we be allowed to pour 8 different wines at half an ounce or less, or does it not matter how much you pour?
I'm going to defer to council. Ms. Gilbert?
Under Colorado law, that'd be a maximum of 4 pours. You couldn't split it among 8.
Got you. Yep, I wasn't clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else? Any other member of the authority? Seeing nothing else, what's the pleasure of the authority? May I have a motion, please?
Yes, sir. I move that the local licensing authority approve a tasting permit for the retail liquor store license of Wines for Humanity, LLC, DBA, Wines for Humanity.
May I have a second, please?
A second.
We do have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Marsh Holshan,
Yes.
Murray,
Yes.
Berlin,
Yes.
Jezierski.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion passes. Mr. Steinhardt, good luck to you, and thanks for stopping in with us tonight.
Thank you for your time, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Good luck.
Thank you.
We'll move to agenda item 4, petitions and communications. We have the violation report update, and it doesn't appear to me that there's anything new on it.
That is correct.
5, police department report. There is no police department report. Number 6, city and county attorney's report, status of city and county of Broomfield marijuana regulations. Ms. Gilbert.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to bring to the authority's attention what is happening with council in the state of the proposed marijuana regulations. At the February 23rd meeting, council approved on first reading marijuana regulations, and I put a link in the memo to that council memo that has the proposed ordinance. There were some amendments made. At the time I did this memo, the minutes of that meeting weren't available, so those exact amendments are not linked here, but they are available in the meeting minutes for that council meeting. But this is the first step in getting the marijuana regulations passed. It will go to second reading on March 16th, and during that time, council can make additional changes. But I wanted to bring it to the authority's attention, kind of where we are in the process. And since they aren't final, I thought that we would wait until the regulations were final before we went through them and discussed them in a little more detail. So that's my presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I have been listening into all those discussions, and I feel sorry for you listening, and the meetings go on forever. Mr. Jezierski, I have a question for you. I sent you some emails directly to you asking about an amendment that you made talking about the boundary on Midway. I think the amendment failed anyway, but I didn't know if council members see emails that come to them, because I think someone said East Midway instead of West Midway, and I want to be sure that you saw that, and I didn't know whether you got my email.
So Gary, I did receive it after the meeting. I wasn't looking at the emails during the meeting, so I didn't see it until after the meeting, but I did receive the email. And you're right, it's kind of a moot point at this point right now.
Yeah, so might be a better time and a place for this discussion, but if we're listening to something like that, or I listen into Dylan Point and the others, and we have something to get to one of the council people quick, what's the best way to do it? By text or?
Yeah, outside of actually calling in, and I think the preferred method would be to call in and hopefully comment ahead of time. If you have something that is relevant, that we could look at, if it's not a public hearing, and you know, our legal counsel can also comment on this. You know, I would say, yeah, texting is always, I'd see a text more likely than seeing an email, I guess.
Okay, well, if I'm listening in and I see an inadvertent error that could kind of mess up a description or something like that, I like to send it to them so they can make an amendment to the motion. But like you say, this one was moot and went on forever, so I empathize with you.
If I may add, it's going to depend on if it's a quasi-judicial process, then we would not want you to text. All of the information which council needs to make a decision needs to be in the record. So the council member receiving the text would need to disclose that. So with respect to legislation, for example, in the marijuana ordinance, that's a different, it's kind of a different proceeding. It's the legislative function of council and not the quasi-judicial. So, I mean, obviously the best thing is to try to get the information ahead of time, but if you're seeing something, hopefully we can correct it on our own.
Okay. Like Stan said, it's kind of a moot point because the amendment died, but it would have made a difference on east and west, but moot point. So anyone else have any questions for Ms. Gilbert?
I do.
Mr. Murray?
Pat, the documents that were sent to us are 163 pages long, and someplace in there was a comment about the city attorney's office was going to follow someone else's guidelines on our recommendations for potential penalties. And I can't find that right now, but do you recall what I'm talking about?
It's the state guidelines that we will be looking at in terms of, you're talking about marijuana violations?
Yes.
It's a reference to the state guidelines.
Okay, so we'll potentially mirror the state guidelines on penalties.
Correct. We'll need, when after the regulations get finally enacted, depending on how they are as the final version, then we'll have a discussion in terms of what the local licensing authority needs to do in terms of adopting additional regulations or rules, because we have the authority to do that, and in order to fulfill the responsibilities in terms of enforcement under the new regulations. Okay.
And then I didn't read all 163 pages, but I read enough to come up with this next question. I assumed, and you know what happens when you make an assumption, inappropriately, that our function with dealing with marijuana applications would mirror liquor applications, meaning an application for a new business would come before us, and if there were any violations later on, we would be involved in hearing the violations and potential sentencing. I read that there's going to be a totally separate, but I didn't see a definition of who, how, or what marijuana board that's going to hear the applications, and our board will only be involved in violations. And I'm wondering why that happened, how that happened, and what's going to be involved in generating this new marijuana board.
Well, it's ultimately council's decision about whether to adopt the regulations as they're currently framed. We're talking about a limitation in the number of licenses. So we're talking, unlike liquor, where you have one application. Well, there's a total of 3 at the beginning, and then there's 2 that will be added on the next
2
year.
years or something, yeah.
3 and 2. So you're going to it's anticipated that we will have many more applications than there are licensed to give. So that's a process as set forth in a proposed regulation that goes through the clerk's office and a review committee And then those applications that meet merit are subject to a lottery to get the initial licenses.
I understand the process. I guess I'm just wondering why the difference, as opposed to having the LLA board hear the applications for a new license. Someone else is doing that. Under my reading, or maybe I'm misinterpreting, is someone else going to be reviewing, once all the applications are culled down a funnel and you come up with a manageable handful, and then you have the lottery, who's going to actually issue the license? Right now, we are the ones that issue the license to liquor. Is some other entity going to be generated to issue the license for marijuana stores?
The clerk will issue the license once the applications go through the process under the draft proposal.
Now, will the clerk's office be? I guess I don't understand. To me, that seems like, well, is the clerk going to issue a license based on winning the lottery? And all prior vetting will be done by someone else. The vetting that we do currently is going to be done by someone else. They get down the funnel, and there's a lottery there's 3 slots, and they have 4 applicants that get vetted, and then the lottery goes to 3, and that's done by the clerk. Who does the vetting prior to winning the lottery? I guess
there's a completeness review that's conducted by the clerk, as well as a review committee that reviews all of the applications.
And who is the review committee?
I don't have the language in front of me. It's comprised of staff with different areas of expertise. And it can include consultants, so under the current regulations as drafted.
Do you know when the final definition of the committee is going to be agreed upon and disseminated publicly, so anyone will know kind of what's in Broomfield's future?
Until we have the regulations passed, I can't really answer those questions.
Okay. Stan, just listening to what I'm saying here, and get your wheel spinning for what may be coming up in some future council meetings then.
Those are good questions, and I'll definitely be giving those some thought, Leanne. The one thing I will say is that I know the intent is to take away the discretion as much as possible. That this should be really a process where there's going to be basically a bunch of guidelines that any applicant's going to have to meet, and it should be pretty high standards. We're going to hope that there's going to have a lot of teeth to this. So there's only very few that actually make it to the second part of the process, which is the lottery. But both processes, the sort of meeting the standards, and then the lottery there shouldn't be really, in my mind, any discretion involved. It should be a fairly objective process where the applicant has to check all these boxes. If they check the boxes, then they make it to the lottery portion, then a lottery. So this group or this committee that's going to be reviewing the applications, it should be more just making sure the boxes have been checked, and more than anything else. There should be very little discretion involved in it.
Okay. And just one final recommendation is, because marijuana isn't that old within the state of Colorado law-wise, I always recommend whatever we can plagiarize from some other community who's already gone through the manpower and the brain drain, trying to come up with regulations for their community. If we can steal someone else's work instead of reinventing the wheel on our ends, I think that might be time well spent. So I don't know if you guys have reached out to any other communities yet, but it was working. Thornton just did it last year. Aurora's been doing it for a heck of a long time. Denver's got how many millions of dollars of manpower invested in coming up with proper regulations. Let's spend our money on something else and steal their ideas for free. That's my recommendation. After Pat vets them, of course.
And we've done that, Leon. That's an excellent suggestion. We have reached out to many different communities and looked at what they've done and tried to take the best of the best.
Perfect. I just know that, unfortunately, the legislation at all levels of government it's easy to make a mistake up front, and it takes a long time to change a statute, change an ordinance, change a constitutional amendment. So if we can do it right first, then great for Broomfield and bad for someone else who's trying to reinvent. That's all I got, Mr. Chair. Thank you, sir. Thanks, Pat. Sam?
Any other questions?
There was just one thing. James brought up an excellent question I had never even thought of before on the wine tasting. And I think there's two different things that if it comes up in the future, that was an excellent question. Under Colorado law, it's illegal for a person under 21 unless they meet the categories that James mentioned in someone else's home with the parent present, with parent or guardian, and them given permission from the underage person to be served. But I think that would fly in the face of the liquor law, which says black and white definitively, you can't serve anyone under the age of 21. Am I understanding this correctly, Pat?
I think that is the correct understanding.
So Mr. Steinhardt said, I never thought about it. I'm not going to do it. I thought it was a heck of a question, James. And I just prepare us for any other wine tasting in the future. If someone else comes up with the in-home tasting business and they say, I'm going to do it, we definitively can say, no, you're not, because it's two different parts of the law that are not congruous.
I actually was wondering about the gray area where, Mr. Steinhardt obviously can't serve the underage person, but then what's to stop the parent of the child from giving it to them, even in Mr. Steinhardt's presence? Is that something that?
Yeah, I think this is, I have to tell you, to be perfectly honest with you, I was taken off guard because the application actually has the facility listed where the tasting occurs. Because that's what the license is for. So it's his license at stake. I just have never seen this before, and I didn't quite know what to do.
I think if memory serves from all the licenses I've inspected in my career, the postings in the liquor license doesn't say, I don't believe it says it's illegal for a licensee to serve underage. I believe it says it's illegal for anyone to serve underage, which might address a parent giving alcohol to their child. I think under state law, it's illegal for anybody over 21 to serve anyone under 21, regardless of familial relationship.
No, there's a provision with consent of the parents.
Oh, you're right, but so if you serve to the parent and the parent gives to their child, wow, that's interesting. Interesting, yeah, because if it's on a licensed premise, that wouldn't be allowed, but if it's in a private home, that might be the back door to making it happen. But I don't know if I'd want to be that licensee to be watching that happen in front of me. Interesting. That was an excellent question, James. Very thought-provoking.
I do have somewhat of a funny observation. My wife volunteers at the History Museum, and last week she was cataloging some of the old newspapers and things like that. And she told me 1971, the newspaper that was in Broomfield prior to the Enterprise, there's an article about a recommendation of legalizing marijuana in Broomfield.
Wow.
Wow. What year was that again?
1971, I believe she told me.
Wow.
50 years. Wow. Huh.
So beyond that, is there any other business to come before the authority?
Lobsters and steaks. That's all I got to say.
Someday, Leon.
I
With
know.
our luck, it'd be Salisbury steak and imitation lobster, so.
Yep, you didn't specify.
I do actually have a question.
Go ahead.
What are we thinking as far as when we'll be back in person?
That's another excellent question.
That's a great question, James. I'm asking that at a bunch of different levels.
I know that we're trying to get back, we're shooting at June to be in a more normalized environment, perhaps with council too. And I think that's probably a decent goal for the authority. I'd love your thoughts on that.
I, for one, will have both my vaccines by then.
I have an appointment tomorrow at HHS to get my first one.
Pat, what are the current state and/or Broomfield restrictions on numbers of people sitting at a table in a restaurant, for instance?
At a restaurant, I don't have the guidelines off the top of my head. I don't know that it used to be either 8 or 10. And since we're moving in between yellow
It's getting bigger.
and blue, those numbers have increased. So I don't know, technically I don't know what it is in blue right now, and we're in blue.
Yeah, I'm just wondering because sitting up at the dais, we're right next to each other. That might be, we're not going to have, well, we could spread that a little bit, so we might be able to have social distancing. In the audience, there's certainly room to social distance. Tonight, if we were sitting down eating lobster and steak, there would be 7 of us at the large conference table in the back room. That's enough room for us to spread around. So maybe June might be too long for us if we keep on heading in the safer direction like Broomfield's been doing for the last couple of months.
Well, technically we could do it now, because with the numbers, and if we did it in the conference chambers, the way it's set up now, I don't know if you, there's no longer one dais, there's 2 daises, and there's different stations. And so we could definitely distance, we could be 6 feet apart in council chambers. And Jake, I think we could even have people, we'd have to look at that. So let's take a look. Samantha, you and I will take a look at what that would look like. I think we could keep people in terms of the licensees 6 feet apart, and the capacity limit. Now that we're in blue, we would be able to fulfill those in that large of a room.
Okay. This after the first month, we had a couple of glitches. This has worked fine, but still a face-to-face and a elbow bump, I think, is more than this has been.
Well, let us kind of look at that, as well as talk with the city manager's office, because get some direction from them in terms of what they want to see, because this problem is not unique to this public body. We have different other planning and zoning and others that are virtually. So let me just do some homework on this one.
Okay, cool, great.
Leanne, I'm with you though. I agree with your sentiments there. I think sooner the better.
Yep. Yeah, and well, it's interesting. Tonight, the gentleman that lives in Grand Junction, I'm sure he appreciated remote, but for the most part, everyone is local or front range. It's not that difficult to drive, and I miss human interaction. So there you go. That's all I got, sir.
Before we adjourn, Sam, would you please either tell me the agenda or the meeting date for the discussion that we previously had about local police department doing background on the statewide licenses, so I can read what we had talked about at that time?
Yes, sir. Give me 1 second and let me.
Oh, I don't need it now. Just send me an email or tomorrow when.
Because I tapped Michelle, and I was like, hey, do you know when, where, and how? And she said, she gave it to me. Yeah, here it is. I'm trying to see. But yes, I will find it. And it was August 5th, 2020. August 5th, 2020, she stated that there was, in the petitions and communications section, the decision they made about having to go through local process since the background check is done at the state level. And there was memo about reaching out to the LED to confirm nothing had changed to the individuals if it hadn't been past 6 months. So I can go back on that and I will look at it and I will send it out to all of you. And August 5th minutes and get those over to you. But I read through them and like I said, I kind of got the impression that you wanted it said that you wanted the thing that shows that it is a master file. But like I said, without an IHR and everything, I have no way of running a local check.
Okay, well, I'd be curious what our discussion was and if there was any resolution to it at that time. Because if something came up, DUI, DWAI, we'd never know about it.
So there was a memo that we did, on that August 5th meeting. That memo, we can send it out to everybody, went through the information. So here's what was proposed in that memo. Moving forward, if an applicant provides an approved state master file, in lieu of submitting an individual history record, the clerk's office will provide the following as part of the application memorandum for the LLA's review. The state master file letter, and I think we included that, right?
Yeah, you did.
And if the master file is older than 6 months from the date of the application, the state licensing authority will be contacted to confirm that there haven't been any changes. So was it, I don't know.
It was not 6 months old.
So, okay, so we complied, that's what the proposal was, and in this particular case, that is what we did.
Okay, well, that's good then. So the problem is solved. I just knew we had talked about it.
I remember this now, Gary. I remember I brought up we had an application without the individual record check, and I asked why, and that's where the master file discussion came in. So I got it up here.
I'll take care of you, Leon.
Thanks, Gary.
Would you still like for me to send those minutes out to everyone?
No, I think, well, at least for myself, what Pat just read is all I needed. Anyone else?
I think I'm good. If it's beyond 6 months, we can ask for another, or prior to 6 months, we rely upon the master.
If it's beyond 6 months, it'll be automatic then.
Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah, I just think, as you and I have talked, Gary, a lot can happen with 6 months. You know, with our backgrounds, we know that you got to rely on fresh data as opposed to old data, just to be on the safe side. Cool.
Anything else for the good of the group? Seeing nothing, then we'll adjourn. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Good wishes for Jacob's family, for his wife.